I just pulled this truck in because it was running very rough. It was just unhappy overall. When I started it up outside, it had a check engine light on. Now when I started driving it, it started flashing at me. To me, that's a clear indication of a misfire, so when I pulled it in, I just opened the hood and took a look around to see if there was anything obvious, and you will not believe what I found. As with any check engine light issue, I always like to start by scanning the system so I can see what the computer has to say. After all, it does see everything that's happening with the engine, and it can tell me the problem that it's detecting. In my case, I have several codes actually that I pulled up here, and honestly, most of them we're just going to ignore because they are not related to a misfire in our case. But we will focus on this P0300 code that we have, which is a cylinder 1 misfire, and that confirms what I was feeling driving this truck in here. So let's get under the hood and see what's going on. Whatever ignition components you need to fix your vehicle, check us out at oneaero.com. We have the kits you need to get you back on the road. Under the hood, with the engine running, I try not to run it for too long, but I do like to run it with a misfire and just visually inspect what's going on. I already had the indication that cylinder 1 was my problem, so I focused on that, and would you look at what I found. What you're seeing here, and by the way, never get your finger close to this if you see this, but this is electricity shooting out of the side of the ignition coil boot and grounding out onto the valve cover. And because I see this, I'm going to shut the engine off immediately so we can do some further investigation. Like I said, that's a lot of current flowing through there, so don't get close. Now with the engine off, and especially if you're getting a P0300 code, which is a random misfire code, it doesn't know exactly which cylinder it's coming from, or maybe it's many cylinders. Regardless, with the engine off, you want to do a more thorough visual inspection. So you want to check all of your connections on the ignition coils. You want to check your connections at the injectors. You want to make sure that the wires are good. Sometimes rodents can chew on the wires, and of course that's going to disrupt the connection. You want to make sure no fuel is leaking from any injectors. That can happen, the O-rings can go bad, and of course sometimes the ignition coils can fail in a way in which they actually expand and crack. That makes it no good and would need to be replaced, but would also cause a misfire. Now, if you don't see any of this, of course what's happening is going to be internal, could even be a spark plug, but if you can't see it, you need to dig further. If you can see it though, that's a clear indication of whatever part you see that is broken, well, that's your issue. Now, if you don't see anything obvious, here's a quick tip for you on how to rule out ignition coils without any special tools. Take the ignition coil from the affected cylinder, I marked it with a number 1, and swap it with a known good one, let's say cylinder number 2. Put them the other way around, and if the misfire follows the ignition coil, you know you have a bad ignition coil. If it stays on the initial cylinder that was originally affected, you know you have an issue with something else, whether it's an injector, a spark plug, or unfortunately even a mechanical failure within the cylinder. And now to find that mechanical failure, you can easily run a compression test. Make sure that that cylinder is up to par and about the same as all the other ones. You want about a 10% difference or less. If it's under 10%, you're good to go. If it's above, well, you got some issues. Because I saw what I saw, I'm going to remove this ignition coil so we can investigate further and see what's happening. To do that, simply unplug the ignition coil. In your application, you may have some covers that go over the engine. In my case, I do not. Just unbolt it. It's always going to be held on with one bolt, and it's always going to have one connector. With that off, you should be able to pull the ignition coil right up and out. With the bolt and everything. And, yep, I already see the problem. I got the ignition coil out, and would you look at this split in the boot. Now that is obviously not supposed to be there. The boot is failing. But surprisingly, this isn't actually where the electricity was jumping from the coil to the valve cover, because as it sits in the vehicle, it sits like this. We were actually seeing it go towards the front of the vehicle. And that leads me to this darker spot right here, which looks burnt because the electricity was actually melting its way through the boot. And if I stretch it enough, you see a little pinhole, which is crazy because a little pinhole in just the right spot was transferring or allowing the transfer of current more than this giant split right here. Regardless, the boot is bad. But we have this problem on one cylinder. I'm not just going to throw a boot on it and call it done, because I need to at least check all the other ones. Now, especially if you're replacing just boots, it's a good idea to replace all of them. You don't want all of these to fail at different times, then you have to keep going back and replace boots, and maybe this causes you to be stuck somewhere because the truck has a misfire or vehicle, whatever you're driving. Just replace them all at the same time. It's a great idea to do that with all ignition components in general. Even if you had to replace an ignition coil, it's always a good idea to replace all of them, as well as spark plugs. We sell a lot of these at oneauto.com, and I actually have a kit that comes with some performance ignition coils with, of course, new boots and the spark plugs that go in this engine, so I can refresh everything all at once. I don't want to have to come back to this, especially once this is out on the road. And that way, all the cylinders can fire the best they can. Here's a fun fact about these ignition coils. The performance ones, you might ask, well, what's so different about them other than the color on top? Well, actually inside, the coil winding is slightly different compared to the regular ones to put out just a little bit more power, and that's going to make sure that, especially on these older engines with really high mileage, all the spark plugs are going to fire nice and strong and nice and even.